Hello, my name is Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, April 26th West Weather Update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start here, I thought I'd share this video. This is from the Glen Canyon Dam in Arizona along the Colorado River, and they're performing a high flow release experiment. And as far as I know, they are quickly releasing water in large volumes from Lake Powell into the Colorado River below to help shove some of the sediment downstream that has built up there. And I wanted to share the video because it's just fascinating to see how much water is moving through some of these pipes as they open them up here. 10,000 cubic feet plus of water moving through here per second. Just a fascinating video as they open these up. It's a lot of water. And these are not small pipes. And just to put into perspective the size of this dam, I looked up this picture looking down on this release from the top of the dam, and just this massive dam here makes at the bottom those two streams of water look really quite small. But nonetheless, that is a lot of water being released from there. Now, the Colorado River, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, it has been in the news recently for really a lack of water and low lake levels. If we look at those lake levels over the past few months, we can see that. All the way on the right here, here's where we're at now. But we have been coming down in terms of those lake levels from the peak last year at the peak of the melt season. Now, the good news is if you look over the last few weeks, and I'll just zoom in here over the last 30 days, we have been increasing those lake levels in Lake Powell as a result of the recent snowmelt. So we've been warming up, predictably so, as we warm up in late April across the upper Colorado River Basin. Now we're getting some water into Lake Powell. There's that release, or at least what I would imagine is the release here just over the last few days, ending tomorrow as it's come down a little bit here. But I'm expecting this graph to increase quite a bit as this melt season begins in earnest. Temperatures steadily rising here at the end of April and to May. We'll talk about that a bit in the forecast. In fact, if I jump back to the 1 year view, you'll notice that really the peak last year only about 10 feet higher in terms of water level. The projected increase right now could be as much as 50 to 90 feet in terms of the lake level here. So that would shoot off this graph, at least on the axes that are presented here. So quite a bit more water expected to enter into the hydrology here. Now, the Colorado River Basin, we have the upper Colorado River Basin, that's Utah, western Colorado, even parts of southwest Wyoming, northwest New Mexico, and then the lower Colorado River Basin in Arizona. That upper Colorado River Basin with all that snowpack, a very important source of water for a very important river in terms of infrastructure and agriculture downstream of that in parts of Nevada, Arizona, and certainly California as well. So this is a situation we've been watching closely, and the situation I think right now is expected to improve in terms of water. And water has been in the news for a number of reasons for the Colorado River lately. Now, if we jump over and look at the snowpack right now, at least back in mid-April, so just a few days ago, valid, the blue color you see on this map for Utah, western Colorado, northern Arizona, that blue color, 200% above average for snowpack for mid-April. So we're working with a lot of snow here, which is going to make its way into the Colorado River Valley. Now the green color, parts of Colorado, southwest Wyoming, that even by itself is still above average. So we have a lot of water left to work with in terms of melting into the Colorado River. Now the basins here are not totally covered in snow. It's a little bit confusing when you look at this map specifically. So I thought I'd just take you over and look at the current satellite imagery across the interior west, across Utah, parts of Wyoming, Colorado on this map as well. That light blue color here is snow. This product makes it a bit easier to view on satellite. That snow differentiated from the clouds, which are in white there. So Utah, you can see the mountain ranges here covered in snow. Colorado, that light blue color peeking through the clouds here. A lot of healthy snowpack there, and even some snow in parts of southwest Wyoming. We'll start to melt some of that as we go through these warmer weeks here and move into May, and that will improve the water situation in the Colorado River, and a river that desperately needs more water right now. Now, we talked about that snow melt. If we look at temperature anomalies over the next 7 days, this is really through 7 days starting right now at the recording of this video, California, Nevada, why mention all the states? It's really the entire western region looking at warmer temperatures, at least west of the Continental Divide here over the next 7 days. Now, we talked about snowfall in Utah, talked about snowfall or snowpack in western Colorado, but California, their record snowpack this year, that melt season has begun there as well, And they've had their own water concerns kind of in the other direction now at this point, where it's too much water all at once and there's some flooding concerns, certainly in the San Joaquin Valley. We've talked about the Tulare Lake bed. This was a lake bed that had been shifted over to agriculture really in the last century, and now visible from space is the flooding there in the Tulare Lake bed. All the way down here, if you can see where my cursor is, this lake has been increasing in size really from the end of March, and the areas here were agricultural land. Unfortunately, this has started to fill in with standing water that you can see here in this dark blue color. Now, there's that light blue color. That's that snowpack we talked about earlier. But unfortunately, this lake bed now filling up with water, now rivaling in surface area a lake like Lake Tahoe. Not necessarily water volume, but lake surface area, and even bigger now than something like the Fresno metro area or the Sacramento metro area. And unfortunately, that Sierra Nevada snowpack is still very excessive. We're still, even now, with some of the melting having already occurred, at 200% of normal. If we jump over and look at that graph specifically, the one I'm looking at is the South Sierra graph. That blue line is our 2023 snowpack, which here at the end of April is still exceeding the 1983. That's the red line there. That near record snowpack in 1983, which caused the Tulare Lake bed to flood the last time in 83. And we're still above that and have all that snow left to melt. And my fear, my concern, and where I think things are going, that situation, unfortunately, could get worse in the San Joaquin Valley. Now, there are other inclement flooding concerns. Yosemite has closed. The national park there closed this weekend as a result of the warmer temperatures in the forecast and the flooding expected there. In fact, if we jump over, look at the NOAA All Hazards map, valid as of this afternoon here on Wednesday, this green color here in California, western Nevada, those are flood watches. There's no immediate rainfall in the forecast for California or Nevada. That is just a result of the warmer temperatures and the snowpack that is expected, prompting the closure of Yosemite. So really that flood, snowmelt season, those concerns have really ramped up here as we've warmed up the temperatures. Now, if we look at the forecast going forward, I'll step you through just the next 7 days here. There's those kind of the low clouds I showed you across Colorado, perhaps some snow showers there west of the divide. But if I take this through Thursday, clear weather across the west region continuing on Thursday. If I take this into Friday, you'll notice a low pressure system making its way down the continental divide there in parts of Montana, getting into Wyoming very early on Friday, kind of overnight Thursday into Friday, to the point where Friday midday, this is now moving through Colorado, off the region into New Mexico and into Texas as we go through the day on Friday, but still west of the divide, the western coast. This area staying clear and temperatures warming up there as we go into the weekend. If I take you through Saturday, even through Sunday, we remain clear across most parts of the west, all the way into next Sunday, where now we finally see our next weather maker just off the coast of Washington, off the coast of Oregon, with perhaps by Sunday PM some light rain starting there for some of the coastal areas. Now, as I slowly take you through Sunday evening, Monday into late Monday, this low pressure system crawling down the western coastline, perhaps some light rain moving into some of the coastal areas in Washington, Oregon, Northern California in the meantime. But kind of curiously, this low pressure system stalls and sits off the coast of California by midday Tuesday, really just kind of off the coast of San Francisco, helping to funnel some light rain into the coastal areas there, perhaps even some rain showers getting into the Central Valley on Tuesday. Now, this is looking pretty far out. We're all the way 7 days out in the forecast, all the way out to next Wednesday, May 3rd. At least right now, the ECMWF has this low pressure system lingering just off the coast of California, where it eventually tries to make its way back over toward California, back over toward Oregon, with potentially more rain shifting into the area all the way out at the end of next week. Now, I typically don't share the forecast all the way out this far, but I did want to highlight not necessarily the risk, but this chance for this low pressure system to really linger around the west, or at least the west coast, for a number of days. And at least the result right now over the next 7 days, which is a little bit too early to capture that whole situation, is drier across much of the western region. As I showed you at the beginning, really the next 5 days are largely clear for just about the entire region. You can only see the influence of that late low pressure system kind of just off the coast there of California. Temperatures over the same time period, I showed this map earlier in the video, expected to be warm over the next 7 days. Now, breaking down the temperatures a little bit more, because we talked about that snow melt earlier. Here are the temperatures valid as of Wednesday. As we go into tomorrow, temperatures warming up in the Central Valley, low 90s for the San Joaquin Valley and parts of the Sacramento Valley as well. On Friday, temperatures warming up a little bit more as that ridge really settles into place across the West Coast. These upper level ridges tend to promote warmer weather and drier weather underneath them. Not a surprise to see some of that warmer weather moving into the Willamette Valley with mid-80s expected there on Friday. Saturday, that warmth spreading across even more regions in the west, even into eastern Washington, Oregon, and parts of Idaho. And then slowly this upper level ridge here wants to shift east with time. Central Valley stays warm through the weekend, but you'll notice now with the influence of that upper level trough and that low pressure system moving into parts of Washington and Oregon, the temperatures start moderating there to the point where Tuesday, now California, with that upper level low off the coastline, starts to see more seasonal temperatures. Now, if we want to forecast and get an idea of where we're going kind of after that next week as that low pressure system lingers off the coast of California, I'll take you to the jet stream forecast here, make it valid as of this evening, just kind of show you the upper level ridge I was talking about. If I take this out over the next few days, this isn't a Thursday, getting into Friday, those next 2 days expected to be warmer, certainly than Wednesday here, you'll notice this ridge in the jet stream here. And if I make the color a little bit brighter, perhaps I can make that a little clearer, show you what I'm looking at here. This really kind of, this hill in the upper level winds here, signifying that upper level ridge in the jet stream. And underneath these ridges, we tend to get warmer and drier weather. So not a surprise to see in the forecast for parts of Oregon and California, warmer temperatures. Now, I mentioned this ridge is shifting east with time. If I take this through Saturday into Sunday, you'll notice we've shifted that ridge. Now it's really centered over eastern Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada. And temperatures predictably warming up there, shifting east a bit with time to the point where Sunday evening, now we have the influence of this upper level trough and this low pressure system associated with that impacting parts of Oregon and Washington, helping to bring temperatures down there by early next week. Now, if I take this out to May 2nd, into May 3rd, all the way a week now out in the forecast, you'll notice this upper level trough here really cuts off. We call this a cutoff low. And these tend to linger. So it wasn't a surprise to me when I showed you that forecast of that low pressure system underneath this upper level trough lingering across the west coast of the U.S. That's the forecast in the GFS, the forecast also in the ECMWF model here. So at least as we get into the middle part of next week, we're expecting that low pressure system to linger and perhaps try to re-exert its influence in the form of light rain to moderate rain into some parts of the west coast, perhaps the Central Valley of California, and even up into Oregon, and perhaps even some light precipitation getting in to the Intermountain West and areas east of there. Now, I'll walk this all the way out through Thursday, all the way into next week, Friday, toward next weekend, and you'll notice even all the way into next weekend, we still have something of an upper level trough here. We talked about how those ridges are kind of like hills, while the troughs are kind of like the valleys in between, and underneath troughs, we tend to get active or cooler weather, so precipitation and cooler weather underneath them. And I think that would be expected into parts of California, Nevada, and even Oregon as we get into next week with that upper level troughing and that low pressure system lingering around the west coast. What does this look like in the week 2 time frame? Really kind of starting Wednesday or May 3rd of next week and looking out into the next week beyond that. Well, not a surprise then that starting Wednesday of next week, looking out the next 7 days beyond, colder weather with the influence of that upper level trough situated in California, Nevada, even some parts of Oregon. As far as precipitation over that same time period, ECMWF precipitation anomalies, again, that week 2 time frame, a focus, at least in that moisture axis, on California, Nevada. Now, this won't be an event that will rival some of the atmospheric river events we saw earlier this year, but May, typically we start to get a bit drier in California. So an event like this stands out a little bit on the color bar in terms of increased precipitation, but not expecting kind of extreme event or anything, just lingering precipitation and rain shower chances as we close the week next week. If we look out at the Climate Prediction Center, there's 6 to 10 day outlooks. That's kind of getting into that week 2 time frame. If we look at temperatures across that same time period, California, Nevada, parts of Arizona staying cooler in the presence of that upper level low. Just rain, cloudiness tends to keep temperatures down there. And then that same kind of similar bullseye for precipitation across the central part of California and into Nevada, perhaps even extending into parts of eastern Oregon or the Snake River Valley of Idaho, and then warmer north of there as that upper level low kind of situates itself under something of a ridge there closer to Montana into Canada. Now, if we look out to the 8 to 14 day outlook, this is May 4th all the way through May 10th, you'll notice there's not a huge shift in the forecast there. And I'll kind of jump back quickly. If you just look at temperatures, the same area expected to be cooler, and that 6 to 10 day remains the case with a slight change in that 8 to 14 day outlook. And the precipitation axis does not change much either. And what we're seeing here, I think, is that kind of lingering trough off the coast of California. It reminds me of kind of atmospheric blocking. The system, the jet stream's getting a bit blocked up, and that tends to entrench or keep the same pattern around for potentially a week, maybe even more. And I think we're seeing that here in the 6 to 10 day and the 8 to 14 day outlook showing such a similarity. In fact, if we go all the way into the week 3 to 4 forecast, we don't show that too often here from the Climate Prediction Center, but you'll notice even the pattern here, May 6th all the way out to May 19th through mid-May, still shows similarity there. Colder in California, at least slightly below average, Nevada, Arizona as well, and that precipitation axis over the same area there in California and Nevada. So I think the atmosphere is just getting a bit blocked up. We're going to be sticking around with this pattern for a while as we enjoy the warmth here over the next few days. We talked about that snow melt. I think this will be a pattern shift as we get into next week, and that could linger for perhaps another 5 to 7 days, even beyond that next weekend as well. We'll take a closer look at that when we get to that time period there. Now, the good news here is that all else equal helps perhaps to slow down some of that snow melt. A concern for the reservoirs, a concern for flooding and the flood watches we just looked at is if we entered into that warm up that we saw this week, and that were to be the forecast for the next 2 weeks. All right, so warmer temperatures, much warmer than average, sticking around for a week or two with kind of heat waves in between, could cause a rapid snowmelt, perhaps too much for the rivers and streams to handle. That would be a concern. At the very least, this is kind of a moderation of that snowpack and will help extend that over a longer period of time, and that's just easier for the hydrology to manage and deal with. While we're here, we'll take a look at the 1 month forecast. This was released last week. We covered it in the report last week. But we see the influence, I think, there of that colder pattern in California. If the first half of the month is cooler for Central and Southern California, that's enough to maybe influence the entire monthly forecast there. Perhaps drier in the Pacific Northwest, slightly above average temperatures forecast there, just to kind of remind you of where we were as this forecast was released on April 20th. Now, if we look at the 30-day, the monthly forecast from the ECMWF weeklies, they kind of show a similar area of higher precipitation amounts in California and Nevada. Not the strongest of signals here. And I think what they're picking up on is the confidence in kind of the near term, that May forecast, the first kind of 10 days of May, showing that highlighted chance for increased precip in California. That would probably be enough to make the end of the month, still kind of added up all at the end, slightly higher than average. So not seeing, a super rainy signal after kind of mid-May here. It might be that when we work through this pattern here, we work through some of that atmospheric blocking, that we shift back toward something of a more seasonal, drier pattern, and that could work with the temperatures as well. Now, I will show those temperature forecasts from the ECMWF for the next month. We see this kind of very consistent signature. We've seen this really quite often from the ECMWF monthly forecast here, where we're colder just across the entire western region. I will say I'm fairly skeptical of that right now. That's been kind of a consistent feature here. I think it's really a combination of two things going wrong a bit in the model. One is it's resolving some of that record snowpack across the west. That tends to keep temperatures cooler and can sometimes bring the model a little bit cooler than it should be. And then if we look at sea surface temperatures, the model's also analyzing those as it starts to process and calculates things. We see this negative PDO, or these colder ocean waters off the west coast of the United States. That will work to keep things cooler across the west, all else equal, but the influence of these temperatures will wane as we go through May. And if we even jump back to the Climate Prediction Center, their forecasts for the month, just specifically looking at temperatures, we do have that colder temperature signal in California, but it's not the biggest cold temperature signal we've seen. And for the rest of the western U.S., they have equal chances of above or below average temperatures, if not even above average in parts of the Pacific Northwest. So I don't think the cold will be as extreme or as extended in that forecast as was advertised there on the ECMWF monthly forecast. And one thing that we note about the PDO, we've talked about, I think, the influence there. I think there's been some influence in that atmospheric blocking, the colder shift back here that we're looking at next week, and perhaps the active shift there, I think, is in part due to those colder waters off the west coast of the United States that I just showed you there. We've noted those. Those influences will begin to wane as we head into the summer months. In fact, I did a little experiment here just to kind of analyze that. And what you're looking at here is a map of the really the northern hemisphere of the globe here. And we looked at the influence of the PDO, the correlation with the PDO on those upper level troughs or ridges. And really what we're looking at here is that across the western half of the U.S., that we see very low correlations with PDO in summer. So this is June through August. So when we compare those upper level heights, whether we're going to have a trough or a ridge, we don't get much predictability from PDO in either direction. So I think we're going to start to see a waning influence of the PDO in the coming months. I think it's going to be replaced in influence by the developing El Niño. And a quick update on the developing El Niño. The Bureau of Meteorology, they just released their new forecast. This came out today, April 26th. The Bureau of Meteorology, they're out of Australia. Australia in close proximity to those Pacific Ocean temperatures, and El Niño, they tend to be very focused on changes there. Their forecasts are typically very good for El Niño as a result of that. And they are forecasting a very aggressive shift toward El Niño in the Pacific in summer of 2023. And that forecast is here. Above this red dashed line here is where we have, we shift into El Niño territory. They have us shifting into El Niño territory really by May, next May. Not next May, but by at some point in May. But we go well beyond just the El Niño threshold into, at least right now, this, if it verified, even just this green mean line here would be at or a near record El Niño ever in the record. So this would be an extremely strong El Niño event if it were to come true. Now, I will say the Bureau of Meteorology is the most aggressive forecast model right now. And they're very transparent about that. They go ahead and compare the BOM model here, where this gray bar being their strong forecast, with all the other models in the system. But even if we look at some of these other models, not as aggressive, but they still have almost all of them us entering El Niño in the Pacific by July of 2023. In fact, only one of them has this remaining out of El Niño by June. And if we shift to July, by the start of August here, even that one now has us entering El Niño in 2023. So something to watch. I think the El Niño influence will pick up across the West and will start to dominate that PDO influence that was there a bit earlier this spring. Now, if we look at the forecast there for summer from the Climate Prediction Center, we see a shift toward warmer temperatures this summer. We've been talking about cooler temperatures and returning to those repeatedly across the West as a result of those negative PDO or those colder ocean temperatures. But that shift toward El Niño influence as we go into June, July, and August, I think brings back the risk for warmth across the Pacific Northwest. We can see that evident here. Another aspect of El Niño could be a drier Pacific Northwest pattern. And we see that if we look down here at the precipitation forecast for this summer. And then the third piece there is during El Niño years, we tend to get an amplified subtropical jet out of Mexico across the southern United States. That subtropical jet, those fast winds in the upper levels of the jet stream, tends to disturb the monsoon cyclone here in the desert Southwest. It tends to disrupt that and weaken it. So it's not a surprise to see them having a slow start or forecasting a slow start to that monsoon season in the desert Southwest as a result of that. So that's kind of where we're sitting with the forecast this summer. We've seen that PDO influence kind of recently here over the last few weeks. I think we're shifting away from that as we get into June and July, and it will be replaced with this El Niño influence, which could increase warmer temperature concerns as we go toward the end of summer, overlapping a bit with the wildfire season. Perhaps some risks there. We'll cover that as we get closer to that time period. Looking out beyond that, if we do get into this kind of Bureau of Meteorology very strong El Niño, I would think chances were pretty good if we were to get up into this very strong threshold here of sticking with that El Niño event through next winter. Now, forecast confidence in the weather or certainly anything starts to drop a bit as we go through time, right? So not extremely confident that we'll be in an El Niño through next winter, but I certainly think the chances are more likely than not, given some of the forecasts that we've seen here recently. That would increase the chances for another good water year potentially for the Colorado River Basin. Arizona tends to get more water out of these El Niño winters. Central California, certainly Southern California, or perhaps even Nevada and Utah, we could see more precipitation next winter So kind of following up two good winters after another, which would improve, I think, the water situation across the Colorado River. And despite, obviously, we want to account for the flooding concerns in California that have been going on, but at least the water situation in terms of the reservoirs likely improving here. Certainly this year as we fill up some of those reservoirs, but we could be having another year like that next year. It's not uncommon for the western half of the United States, if you look through history, to kind of get stuck in either some really good years repeatedly, where you have enough water or perhaps even too much like we've seen lately, or we shift into these drier years, which we saw just recently. We think we see some of those drier periods end, where you get stuck in a drier or drought pattern for a few years. So it wouldn't shock me if we kind of get stuck into something of a wetter pattern here going forward, with the caveat that it's a bit too early to talk specifics all the way out into not next winter. With that being said, that's all I have for you all this evening. Thanks for watching.